back to the Talking Cars podcast. I'm Alex Nizick.
I'm Ryan Pilakowski.
I'm Maddie McCarty.
How you guys doing today?
Not too bad.
Good?
Not too bad.
Great.
Perfect. All right, so today we are going to be talking about the 2025 Hyundai Sonata. It's actually got a refresh recently, refreshed in 2024, but we bought a 2025 model for our testing. And so, Hyundai, they tend to make some bigger refreshes, and we're going to talk about a little bit about why we bought this vehicle, right? You might be thinking about sedans versus SUVs in the world of cars these days. Sedans are definitely less popular, but they're still really important to a lot of automakers. I mean, if you look at sales data, Toyota Camry still sells a ton. The Accord selling over 100,000 units, this year so far.
Well,
so Hyundai's really trying to breathe some life into their Sonata to make it more competitive against these vehicles that have been recently redesigned. So we'll get into all that. But before that, what we bought a 2025 Sonata SEL Convenience, front wheel drive, and that'll be important later. And this is actually the top internal combustion engine or ICE version of the car. And they're doing this thing which other automakers are doing, where if you want to get the top version of the car, you actually have to go with the hybrid. So,
right.
We've seen that from Honda and Toyota.
Everybody
now.
else seems like.
Yeah, everybody's kind of doing that. So they're following that trend. And we paid, in the end, with pretty much no options. We just bought the car as is in this trim, $32,705, which includes a $1,150 destination fee. So Ryan, tell us a little bit about why we bought a refresh of this model instead of waiting for a full redesign.
Sure. So we wouldn't normally test refreshes, I guess, because we are not made of money, right? But everybody's refresh, the definition of refresh or redesign is different.
Right.
So we felt there was enough substance here to retest.
Mm-hmm.
Some things we'll talk about. They've improved.
Yeah.
Things they've added, motors that they've dropped, stuff like that. So, but yeah, I mean, it's a matter of if we think it's significant enough that we'll do better in our test, better or worse in our testing. We should test it. So
yeah, and when it's an important car like the Sonata, if they make enough changes where our existing road test isn't really relevant anymore because it's based on hardware that you can't buy anymore, we would have to drop those results because it's not representative of the car now. So if we want to help shoppers or consumers who are interested in this car, it needs to be reflective of the current version, right? So we made that decision.
Yeah, and to be clear, we're not buying every single model year of these cars. We're just kind of doing every few years or so when there's significant changes that pop up.
Right. Yeah, it's a strategic approach because, as Brian said, we're not made of money. We can't be, sometimes people think we test every single model year of the car every single year. And
it's not even money, it's just resources, right? There's not that many of every yard,
What do we test, 60 or 80 cars a year?
I don't even know where we're at now.
Yeah, depends on the year, but
yeah.
And a lot of times a vehicle goes from one year to the next without anything significant, so it wouldn't make sense to do that. So it's case by case, right? Ryan, so tell us a little bit about, just at a high level, what the changes are with the 24 Sonata versus the previous one.
Right. So they still, it's still a 2.5 liter, but they have dropped the optional 1.6 turbo, which in the last generation, we had, just looked at specs and they're not that much different. So it was just like an option to have, I guess, right?
Yeah. Didn't really seem worth it and made that recommendation. Just stick with the base one.
Right. You can get this in all-wheel drive, which is, I think that's important. That's a nice added thing. Infotainment system, standard CarPlay, wireless CarPlay on all of them now. The previous generation, it was only on the base model, and then as you got up to the higher trims, it was just it was for plug-in CarPlay. Right?
Yeah, it was kind of strange, right?
Yeah, it seemed that backwards.
Yeah, you'd think that if you're paying for a higher trim, you would get the more convenient wireless trim, but they fixed that now, which is good.
That was a problem across their whole lineup.
Yeah.
Got the larger, nicer screen, you got less in terms of that. So
yeah. Obviously, an obvious change is the styling, which I guess we can talk about at some point. But
kind of looks like Robo.
Yeah, it's just so I think it's rather interesting, but the styling is quite a bit different. Yeah. And they improved the ride. I think, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
I don't know. I thought there's a lot of the car for the money.
Right.
I was, in general, I was very pleased with it. It's not the most exhilarating car to drive. It's rather mundane, I think, in terms of handling. The engine just has just enough power to not a speed demon, but it rides a lot better.
Yeah.
It's competitive. I think it sits up close with the Camry and the Accord now.
And if you look at our previous road tests from 2020, when this generation of the Sonata came out, I mean, the ride was one of the big things that we thought contributed to its, it lagging behind some of its competition, right? So,
yeah.
And Maddie, I know you have a thing or two to say about a ride, at least from where they've been.
Yeah, when I was in high school, so many years ago, I drove a 2006 Sonata. It was a used car, so we weren't sure if the suspension was because it was older or if it was because it was the car. And my family gave it a nickname. We called it the boat.
Yeah.
Because it tended to kind of like just sway back and forth, even on straight roads. And then you take a curve and you kind of like swing to the right or swing to the left. And
How many miles are on it?
I don't know.
Maybe
But-
no sway bars.
Somebody took some
But
parts off.
then we were looking at the old 2006 road test.
Yeah.
And it says, the Sonata doesn't feel particularly agile in corners, which makes it feel bigger than it is, and the car exhibits noticeable body lean, which is exactly what I experienced.
Yeah.
Mid-corner bumps cause the car to bob and pitch. Body motions are frequent, with slow bounding in all directions. The car tends to be comfortable, but a bit buoyant at highway speeds. All of these adjectives are for boats.
Hey, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you were describing it, and I'm reading along this road test from 2006 from our original test of, I think it was the 5th generation. It was like, wow, this is
it.
Yeah, that's exactly what you were experiencing.
So I think in comparison now, when I hopped into that car, I was kind of expecting that. But what I got was just like much better. And like you said, kind of like in line with a Camry, and where it's just like an good average car nowadays.
Right.
So I was happy with it, actually.
I'd almost argue it rides a little better than the Camry in terms of ride. Yeah. I think the Camry is more engaging, but it's not a boat anymore.
Yeah. No, I mean, they made I think that other than maybe this RoboCop styling and some of the interior stuff we'll talk about, that's got to be the next most significant change, right? The other one was pretty stiff when we tested it in 2020. And maybe you lost some handling agility versus that car in 2020, but not enough where it really matters.
For this type of car, I think it's probably where it should be now.
You're going to appreciate a comfortable ride a lot more, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So, and you mentioned the engine, the powertrain. I do want to just hit on the fact that a lot of the refresh changes in terms of infotainment styling, whatever, they apply to the hybrid as well, which is still available, and that gets a different powertrain. And also the sportier N-Line version gets some of those styling changes as well. So Maddie, take us, I guess, inside of the car, talk about some of the infotainment changes and just what they did to kind of refresh the interior.
So Hyundai is launching like its new infotainment system. We've seen it in many other Hyundais and that we've tested already recently, but now we have a 12.3-inch driver screen with a 12.3-inch center screen, and they have connected the two so that they kind of look seamless. They are two different screens, but it gives a nice aesthetic look to that. And then now we have the standard wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and then Climate has moved into a separate touchscreen. And so while it's very similar to a lot of Hyundais and even Kias that we've tested, it is a little bit unique in its own way. With this Climate panel, we've had some issues with sun glare coming and blocking the view of the touchscreen, so you can't actually like see what you're looking at or look at the LEDs that kind of just wash out in that sunlight. So that's a little bit more difficult to use in that regard. But the touchscreen itself, I feel like it's been upgraded and it's now easier to use. It has large, colorful tiles that stand out from each other. It's not too colorful where it's like you can't even tell what you're looking for, but it's really nice.
Right.
It's clean. It's responsive. So I think it is a nice addition to the Sonata, especially with the driver's screen. It's also very clean as well, and things pop out. The most necessary information, like your speedometer and your gas and your tachometer, those really are highlighted in the driver's screen, which is helpful.
Yeah, I agree with the responsiveness. I thought it was, when I touched it, it did what I was looking for. Sometimes that could be frustrating, or double tapping stuff.
Yeah, and then you accidentally undo what you
say. Yeah, it worked pretty well, I thought.
Yeah, they seem to be, Hyundai does a good job of their adding features to their infotainment system over time without making it just overly complicated.
Yeah.
The more you add, I guess, it's going to add some layer of complication, but you look at some other infotainment systems now, they're just like, you just visually clutter, right? With the colors and all these icons and the craziness going on. So it seemed to be doing a decent job, but then kind of going in a different direction with the Climate overall.
Yeah, I wish that they had kept like the hard controls and dials, because those are definitely easier to use. And yeah, the Climate screen looks nice, but at the end of the day, can you use it without looking? Can you use it in direct sunlight?
Yeah.
So it's definitely a con of the vehicle, but there are lots of pros inside.
Yeah. Yeah, and they kept like the steering wheel and cluster systems pretty much where it's been, right? And
Yeah.
pretty simple to use.
Didn't mess with the headlights, didn't mess with the turn signal like a lot of other OEMs have.
Right, for sure. All right, what about Maddie, like ADAS and safety features? I mean,
Yeah, there's a lot packed into this car, and it's standard. So it comes with standard AEB with pedestrian, cyclist, and junction turning detection. LKA, which is lane keeping assistance, and LDW for lane departure warning. We have lane centering assistance, which is actually independent from ACC, adaptive cruise control. And I'll tell you what that means. So in a lot of other systems, if you want to have steering assistance to help you stay centered in your lane, you also have to use your adaptive cruise control.
Right.
But in this Hyundai and many other, actually all Hyundais that we are looking at, you can use that independently. So you could control your speed while the vehicle is helping keep the vehicle centered in the lane.
I
right.
didn't
So-
know that. I like that.
We've had a
I didn't know that was because we generally like you get too warned into having both. And I don't care for that sometimes. Right.
yeah.
I learn something every day.
And a lot of people are like, well, why would I want one without the other? But then once they try it, we've seen in our surveys, they actually really do like being able to choose which one they have on at a time.
Right.
So definitely
Yeah,
a pro.
It kind of makes it more intuitive too, just using the systems, right?
Yeah.
In the car.
Yeah. You know exactly what you're getting when you turn on that button.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, their system has generally done pretty well, like these LCA systems and, just in Hyundai in general, right?
Yeah, definitely. We've tested a version of this, what Hyundai calls lane following assist and adaptive cruise control or smart cruise control with stop and go. We've tested this in our L2 reports that we do every couple of years, and it tends to do pretty well in terms of the performance and capabilities of the lane centering and ECC, and it just continues to improve. I've seen, and so I think this is a really solid system that Hyundai's put into the Sonata.
Nice.
Yeah.
So that's more on the tech side. What about just like the fundamentals about the car? I mean, is it just using it day to day, right? In terms of storage and seat comfort and just how you fit in the vehicle. I mean, it's a pretty well-rounded vehicle, right?
Yeah, I found it's kind of one of those easy to get in and go. You have to kind of get used to the shifter. It has that
They moved it up on the
twist thing.
right.
It works okay once you get the hang of it, but I found myself fumbling around a few times at first. But otherwise, it's just a comfortable, easy car to get in and out of. I thought, it's just not overly complicated, which is a rarity these days. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess let's kind of wrap up the Sonata, just thinking about how it compares. I alluded to it a little bit, but
Yeah,
the
kind of,
Accord,
right.
the Camry, Kia's K5, right, which is this sister vehicle from the same or a similar brand, right? So just, do you see this still as kind of lagging behind the competition, or is it more in line? What do you guys think?
I think it's certainly a competitor now. Having driven all three of these now, I think I'd prefer the Camry still. Like I said earlier, I think this actually rides a little better. Camry's got a stiff edge to it, but it's a little more engaging to drive. And the Accord, close too. But I think, this is going to be the car that we'd be called right there with it, I think. And recommending probably.
Right.
So,
Right. Addie?
I think that I probably would go from a different approach. I would go from how easy is it to actually use the interior of the vehicle. And so I would go for the Accord, simply because we have rated the Honda Accord Hybrid and even just the regular Accord pretty high up there. The Accord Hybrid is our highest scoring usability vehicle. So based on that, like if it turns out that they're all very similar for ride and handling and transmission or powertrain, then I would go with the one that's easiest for me to physically interact with.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, we were talking about the climate, right? The Accord is the opposite. It's got the like clicky knobs that are really nice to you. Yeah, satisfying and simple, right?
old school. I can appreciate that. Good point, Maddie.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a lot of car for $32,000 or give or take. When you think about the average cost of a new car these days being, $45,000, give or take what people are paying, right, when they get the car they actually want, feels like a lot. So you're getting a lot between the safety systems and just being pretty well rounded.
Not that we rate it on looks, but I don't care for the styling. I can't get into the styling. It's a little too much.
Well, I think for me, it's like you have this insane looking outside, and then you get in the car, and it's pretty much they changed it a little bit with the infotainment and whatnot, but the overall aesthetic is kind of a little.
Yeah, it's just like you're hopping into a regular vehicle.
Yeah,
nothing surprising, but it's
yeah.
still nice.
I thought it was gonna be a little bit more jazzed up.
Yeah, I feel it's interesting. The K5, which we also have the new version of, I feel like does a better job, kind of feeling more cohesive, I guess, with its interior exterior is a little more exciting, and also the outside matches the inside a little bit more, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. You mentioned safety features, and I just want to add on that blind spot warning and rear cross traffic warning are standard.
Oh, nice.
Yes. So those are very important features, and that we are pushing to have standard. So they do come standard on the Sonata, which is great.
Yeah, it's good to see that with them taking that kind of approach of you have to step up to the hybrid to get the new like kind of reshuffling that trim progression or whatever. Nice that they kept those safety features standard.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so that's all we have for the 2024 in the refresh case, but ours is 25 Hyundai Sonata refresh. So thank you both for running us through that. So now we're going to move on to our audience questions, and for all of our listeners, head to cr.org/talkingcars, and you can submit all your questions there. We love video questions, but even just written questions are great too. And if we end up using your question on the show, we'll even send you some merch. So pretty cool, and definitely encourage that. So our first one we have from Nathaniel from Arlington, Massachusetts. And he says, I need to buy a vehicle to tow a 5,000-pound boat and trailer and would like some guidance. Are there any safety guidelines for evaluating the tow rating of a vehicle? Should I look for a vehicle with a tow rating of just up to 5,000 pounds, or is it safer to get one with more capability? So Ryan, I'm going to start with you.
Well, the quick answer is buy one with more capability.
Yeah.
But there's a million questions to answer here, because when you buy a vehicle, if that can tow, it has a tow rating. There's also a gross vehicle weight rating, right? And that's basically the weight of the vehicle, and then whatever else you can put in it to be at a max load. You have to account for all of that, because your trailer puts load on the vehicle. The gear you put in the car, the people you have with you in the car, and then the load of the trailer can change too, right? In the case of a boat, I mean, if he has this boat already and he knows what it weighs when it's fully loaded with fuel and everything, it might be, if that's the 5,000 pounds, or if it's more than that. Just for instance, I have a 22-foot boat that holds 120 gallons of fuel. That's like over 700 pounds extra that you could be towing that you don't account for, because they'll give you a wet rating and a dry rating and a wet rating of a boat. Right. But if you're another trailer, depending on what you're putting on it, the loads can change radically. You're better off being above. Yeah. And almost always. It's not just that power isn't the issue today. I mean, vehicles are extremely powerful, right? It's handling the load, it's stopping it, it's just driving.
Yeah, you're gonna feel a lot more.
Yeah,
you're below the
better.
limit.
Right, exactly. And we've done some trailer towing stuff here where we've done right at the limit, and some of those vehicles can be a little spooky. Right. Trailering can be dangerous if you're, get yourself into a situation. So, always go above. But pay attention to what what you're going to be towing, what the potential loads are, because you don't want to exceed, especially the weight limits of the vehicle, for sure.
Yeah, and just thinking about people that I know that end up towing things, I feel like whether it's a boat or a camper or something like that, I feel like that over time you end up upgrading that thing. So if you then you have to upgrade your tow vehicle too if you want to get a bigger trailer or a bigger boat or whatever.
Exactly. So, right. And camper's a good example, because you can load a camper up with all kinds of stuff. And room in it, and they'll hold the trailer will hold the weight, but the vehicle's the important part. Really is loading that properly. So. To answer his question, I mean, if you're going to tow, you're towing 5,000, you want to get something that can tow more than that.
Yeah, definitely
within reason. But your gear ratios, all this stuff. There's a lot to dive into. If you're going to buy a truck, I mean, you can buy a truck in 10 different variations, and they'll all tow a different amount because of how they're set up.
Yeah.
So it's certainly something to investigate and research.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Our second question comes from Amy, and she says, I have watched a fair number of your reviews, and I'm always interested in the discussions about screens and buttons surrounding the steering wheel, Maddie. From accessing basic driving information and instruments to infotainment and climate control. I've watched discussions over buttons on steering wheels not being labeled, or having to go through X number of screens to reset or change or find something. The one question I think should be asked, how long would it take for someone not familiar with the car to get in and drive it? If it takes the main driver hours of reading the manual to figure out basic instrumentation and infotainment, then we need to go back to simplifying everything. Especially in case of an emergency or just a family member borrowing the car. Forget panoramic screens, bring back climate control and volume buttons.
There's
So, Matt,
a lot to unpack
there's
there.
a lot, but let's start with you and just kind of break down what Amy's talking about here.
So I totally understand the sentiment of hopping into a car and not knowing how to even put the car into drive.
Every
And-
day. Every day you do a little lot here.
So what we are doing is we are trying to, with our team, evaluate the actual usability or how easy it is to use the interior of the vehicle. So anything that the driver can touch or see, we want to say this is easy to use or this is not easy to use to make it easier for people when they're looking into different cars to just get a sense of, how easy is it going to be when they hop into the car.
And it's really focusing on those everyday items, right? It's not
Exactly.
how difficult is it for me to change the ambient lighting because maybe you do
Right.
that a few times, but
Right.
what am I going to do every time I drive?
Every single time you drive, what are the most common things you do? So we're looking at driving position. So how do you adjust your steering wheel? How do you adjust your seat controls? We're looking at the operation of the vehicle, like I said, like the gear selector, the turn signals, how to use cruise control. Visibility, so how do you adjust your mirrors or your side mirrors, and then lights, headlights, and your cabin lights. We're looking at media in general. We're looking at climate controls, which is a big topic of discussion. And then the last thing that we do is we kind of take a step back from each piece and we look at it as a whole. So how easy is it to go into the touch screen or to use the steering wheel controls as Amy was talking about. So when we do this, we do it with multiple people. It's consensus based. We all come together with our own individual evaluations, and then we come up with a score based on this discussion. So I want to talk more about cars that are a little bit more difficult to use and some cars that are a little bit easier to use. So Amy was talking about steering wheel controls without labels. And there are some offenders here that we have. We have looked at the Lincoln Nautilus, which has touch capacitive buttons where you have to tap the button and then it shows up on the panoramic screen
Right,
above
that's like
you.
a mile away from you up there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
that's frustrating.
And it also changes the button depending on what menu you're in. So if you think you're going to be able to use it without booking, you might be wrong and you might accidentally do something else that you didn't mean to do. So I understand Amy's frustration there.
Yeah.
The Rivian doesn't even have labels on the steering wheel controls, so you're just
Yeah,
guessing.
A press does something different than a hold, right?
Right.
One of the buttons or
Yeah.
a couple of them. Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say here is if it's not predictable, if it's not labeled, you're going to have a really hard time. So I know that it looks nice to have no labels and it's sleek.
So minimalist, right?
Minimalist.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
styling thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not helping drivers. And so that's why we're trying to actually communicate this through our usability score.
Mhm.
And each car has a usability score and it feeds into the overall score of the vehicle.
Mhm.
So it does have an impact. So I think that if the way that OEMs are designing these cars to be appealing to drivers, they forget that drivers actually have to use them.
It's appealing in the joke room, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
And so, and Amy also mentioned you don't want to have to go into the manual. You shouldn't have to go into the manual. If something is easy to use, it's intuitive, and you shouldn't have to pull out your manual just to figure out how to turn on your cruise control or just to figure out how to turn on your headlights.
Right. Maybe go change the ambient lighting, like some really nuanced setting.
Yes.
Okay, maybe these things are getting complicated, so you can't figure out everything instantly all the time. But these basic functions, I mean,
Yes.
that's a little crazy.
Yeah. And that's why bringing it back to the Sonata, it's very straightforward in terms of what's on the steering wheel and your headlights. The climate, it is straightforward. It's just not easy to use physically. But there are other cars that are much easier to use. Like we were talking about the Honda Accord.
Yeah.
That's our top rated one with the hybrid. And we even have another Hyundai Kona, which got a 5, which is our maximum rating. So there are definitely cars out there. You just have to go onto our website and kind of search for that.
Every once in a while, we get a car that comes through,
It is rare.
and it's like a flashback in time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, it's so nice,
It's exciting.
Yeah, it really is. Like the Accord. Like I got in, I was like,
Yeah.
oh, what a
It's great.
time.
Yeah, the new Civic.
Earlier, yeah.
I mean, it's it's rare, but I have faith. I mean, we have a lot of conversations with automakers, and
I think it's going to make a full circle.
I think basically right. Yeah, we're starting to see a little bit of resistance to like my volume is a slider on the passenger side of the car type situation, right? And more knobs and stuff. So I think, yeah, it'll come back around.
Yeah.
I hope.
And like you're saying, we are talking with automakers and they are listening. It's just the process of redesigning the vehicle takes years. So I think as time goes on, hopefully within the next 5 or so years, we're going to see a lot more
It should be trickling.
harder controls and dials into the
Right.
the
Yes,
cars.
exactly. All right. Awesome. Thank you both for that. So our last question comes from Mark from Utah. He says, I was just told that I need to come into work every day instead of working from home. I live 60 miles away from work and I live in the mountains, so all-wheel drive is necessary. Currently, I drive a Subaru Outback, and while it is a practical car, it's not fun to drive. I'm hoping for something a little more enjoyable to drive with good gas mileage. My work offers free charging, so I was thinking about a plug-in or EV. A plug-in hybrid is what he means. Although I'm nervous about the range in the winter. Any suggestions? So this is fun. We get to kind of help Mark potentially shop for a new car. So Ryan, I'll start with you. Any recommendations?
So this was this was actually a little more challenging. Sometimes these are, straightforward. It's a little more challenging, I thought. A few things. If he's in the mountains, 60 miles isn't terribly far, but you're going uphill. Can be cold.
Sounds like a fun
I'd stay away from, what's that?
I said, sounds like a fun commute, honestly.
Yeah, right. I know. So, but I would stay away from a straight EV personally. But I think a plug-in hybrid makes a ton of sense. However, there aren't a ton of fun to drive plug-in hybrids. There really aren't.
Right. At least that's like, we kind of looked at what Mark's driving now with the Subaru Outback and thought, okay, like try to stay within that type of realm, right? Like,
Yeah.
you got to go suggest a $200,000 car or something.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I had some choices that it would be fun, but I don't think it's practical, right? So, I thought maybe a RAV4, it was the RAV4 Prime, I think what do they call it now? They're just the PHEV.
The plug-in.
Yeah.
They dropped the Prime.
And again, that's not terribly fun to drive. It's got some get up and go, which might give it a little. But
the powertrain's fun. And
yeah, but it's super. It's gonna be super reliable and it's practical, all-wheel drive. I think that's where I would go towards.
Yeah. The only thing, you might have trouble finding one.
Well, there's that.
They can be. I know they're pretty popular, so maybe. I know a couple of years ago it was tough to find a RAV4, but yeah, I was actually kind of thinking a similar thing. But Maddie, what do you recommend?
So I just want to say I am from Utah, and nice. So it was really fun.
Then, yeah.
She's like, I have actually done this commute before.
There are tons of Subarus, and so it's a funny question to me because I understand. And so yeah, 60 miles up in the mountains with the snow. Yeah, there's a reason why people choose Subarus and their all-wheel drive cars because that snow can be a lot. So I was trying to find one that was about under $40K. Plug-in hybrids do tend to run a bit pricier, so I went with a hybrid also because it is great that he has free charging at work, but if the charger's down, then you're not getting the benefits of that plug-in hybrid. So a hybrid is great because you always get that benefit, get higher gas mileage. So I chose a 2025 Honda CR-V Sport Hybrid with all-wheel drive. And the ticket price comes to a little over $36K. So the reason why I chose it was because it does have decent gas mileage at 35 miles per gallon. In terms of like sportiness and more fun of a drive, I did read in our notes, our testing notes, that it does have like more responsive steering through curves, and it has like a controlled body roll to help with tighter turns. So I know there's like a delay in the Outbacks, so maybe that will be more fun for him.
Yeah.
And then because also Utah is cold in the winter, I don't know if he's going to be using gloves while he drives like I did. And so having the controls, because I'm big on controls, they are physical controls. They're dials. So because we've seen them in the Accord Hybrid, so then you'll be able to use those.
She likes his Honda. She likes his Honda as well. So.
It's a cool.
He's right though. Yeah.
I mean, Hondas tend to be pretty decent with their handling relative to their direct competitors and whatnot, especially Subaru. And depending on which Outback he has, it might be a little rough climbing those mountains with that whatever powertrain he's got in there.
Yeah,
Subarus can be a little, underpowered at times. So
yeah, and not that it's going to be the most fun, but I think you said that like it's in this class of vehicle.
Yeah.
It's a tough one, I think.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, I tried to think of like a fun PHEV, to your point, Ryan, and I came up with, and this is a total stretch option, but thinking about wagons and whatnot, the Volvo V60 plug-in hybrid would actually be like a really cool car.
Yeah, totally.
Their plug-in system works pretty well, and it's a wagon, you get all-wheel drive, all that, but
Terrible controls, so.
terrible controls, yeah. So Maddie, sorry, and it's going to be an expensive car. So RAV4 Prime is actually where I landed. I think that's a solid choice, and I will say on the EV front, if Mark, you decide you're interested in that, I'd recommend leasing it for a number of reasons. I mean, one, if you don't like the EV life, so to speak, then you just give it back in a couple of years, right?
Yeah.
Also, you can get amazing deals on leasing EVs right now if you want like an Ioniq 5 or something like that, where you can get all-wheel drive, decent range. And the technology for EVs is moving really fast. So buying one's not really your best bet right now because it's going to become outdated more quickly than say a gas or a hybrid car. So
Sure.
yeah. All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Ryan, for your awesome answers and discussion on the Sonata. So that's it for today's episode. So don't forget to check us out on cr.org/talkingcars, and we'll see you next time.